Hey everyone, back again. This is Palpatine. It's going to be my 9.0 Shadowlands updated Elemental Shaman guide. This is going to be mainly for PvE content. As far as PvP talents and stuff like that, I'm not going to cover in this video. I don't feel confident enough as a PvP Elemental Shaman to give you guys that information. So without further ado, let's go over Mythic Plus, Raid, talent setups, Azerite, all that juicy stuff. So, with the Shadowlands pre-patch, there were a numerous amount of changes to pretty much every class. It was called the unpruning or whatever, right? So instead of everything being spec specific now, we do have class abilities back again. This is a great change. Towards the end of Mists Pandaria, players were complaining about having too many key bindings and, it's stuff overwhelming. But I think having class spells is a good thing. It identifies you as a shaman, having access to Bloodlust, and obviously Bloodlust wasn't one of the spells, but you get the point. As a mage, you get access to Arcane Explosion again and Frostbolt, regardless if you're a fire mage. I think that all the changes to the class-wide spells is a good thing. So, some familiar faces here, obviously. Not too many changes here on the first page. We do have access to Chain Heal now as Elemental, which is pretty solid. This is going to give you a little bit of extra utility in 5-man groups for off-healing, helping out your healer. Pretty nice, and yeah. Not much else to say about it. Flame Tongue Weapon is an enchant that obviously, Enhance is very well known for. This is more of a flavor spell. You won't really have too many practical uses for Flame Tongue Weapon. As an Elemental Shaman, most of your damage is going to be intellect based, so you'll be casting rather than meleeing your target. But it's a cool ability either way. Also, same thing with Primal Strike. It's a melee ability, so do with it what you will. If you want to keybind it, go for it. But we also have Healing Stream Totem to all Shaman specs now. This is cool. You just kind of drop it whenever you feel like you need it. Get a little extra healing. Nice. Why not? Give us some more totems. I know they're outdated and whatever people may say, but I think they're kind of cool. It makes you look like a shaman. So, and then we also have some upgrades to a couple of spells. So at level 2, or rank 2, excuse me, at level 54, Astral Shift will last for an additional 4 seconds. As of right now, Astral Shift has an 8-second duration. So this is going to be a really nice change. 12 seconds of 40% damage reduction is really solid. Definitely nothing to scoff at. And it's definitely the right step in the direction for elemental survival purposes. This is a great change. Hex at level 56 has its cooldown reduced by 10 seconds. This is nice. This is cool. Just a little bit of CD reduction on Hex. Why not? Moving on to the elemental specific spells. I will cover talents in the section after this. As of right now, I'm just going to talk about the main spell changes to elemental specific, and then we'll move on. So we have access to Spirit Walker's Grace now as elemental. This is awesome. Getting to cast for 15 seconds while moving is super great. I always felt like the spec was missing something when they removed the Gust of Wind talent in Legion. It kind of lacked that get out of danger quickly button. I know we have access to Ghost Wolf, but if you wanted to just boom move from here to there in a quick second, after they removed it, you don't really have anything. And this obviously isn't a leap or anything, but it is nice, and it's a change in the right direction, providing some more mobility for Ellie. Sounds good to me. Obviously our Fire Elemental, when it's active, your Flame Shock ticks 25% faster. Still a 2.5 minute cooldown. Nothing too much there. So there was also a change to Flame Shock. Now Flame Shock only lasts for 18 seconds and it has a 6-second cooldown. So this no longer means that you'll be able to do up to 4 Flame Shocks. It's going to be really difficult to do unless you're playing the Surge of Power talent, which augments this. As of right now, in the Shadowlands pre-patch, it's going to feel a bit odd only being able to dot 2 to 3 targets at a time without missing too much uptime due to the cooldown of the spell. But however, in Shadowlands, we do have an upgrade to our Fire Elemental that anytime it is active, if we apply a new Flame Shock, it will last for 100% additional duration. So that's kind of where Blizzard wants your funnel damage to come from, is whenever your Fire Elemental is active. And who knows, there might be, a good synergy with a Fire Ele Legendary to have it up more times so you can, get some good priority damage on like a council fight. Who knows? So it's gonna feel a bit odd in the pre-patch not having access to that, but in Shadowlands it won't be a big deal. It'll be just fine. So let's talk about a few things that make you an elemental shaman. So our passive is elemental is called Elemental Fury, and this essentially just makes your critical strikes hit 50% harder. That's just what it is. Instead of dealing 200% normal damage, it'll deal 250% normal damage. So obviously critical strike has a big role in your stat priority, and it's going to have a lot of priority in those cases. We also have Lava Surge as a passive. This just procs anytime your Flame Shock does residual damage and has a chance, and it'll reset the cooldown on your Lava Burst and also make your next Lava Burst instant cast. So this is nice, just occasionally you'll get a proc, you just send an instant Lava Burst. It's nice. And then our Mastery for Elemental is called Elemental Overload. This affects your Lightning Bolt, Ice Fury, Lava Burst, and Chain Lightning spells. And it's based on your mastery percent. I have about 40% mastery, so for me, my Elemental Overload has a 40.3% chance to trigger a second time on a target for 85% of the normal damage and generating a little bit of less Maelstrom. So this is nice. Helps, whenever you just occasionally get some procs, maybe you'll get an extra Maelstrom. You have to cast one less spell for an Earth Shock or an Earthquake. It's cool. It still doesn't have a ton of priority, as it's just not as influential in your spec, I guess, but it's nice to have. I'm not complaining. Don't worry. We are getting a change to Elemental Fury as well. So now at rank 2 at level 52, it also increases your healing critical strikes by 250%. This obviously isn't going to do anything for your throughput, but it's nice to have, now that we have access to Chain Heal, and we also have, maybe a couple Covenant abilities that can have some synergy with this. It's a nice change. I don't think it's going to be that big of a deal, and it's also, free, so why not? That's basically everything in the spellbook. Moving on to talents here. So we do have a few talents that are added. We have a few talents that have kind of shifted around, and a couple that have a few changes. So I'm going to go over each row tier by tier, kind of explain my pick, and then we'll move on. So on the 15 row, Earth and Rage is pretty much the same as it always has been. It's passive damage. It does some nature damage, and nothing really too much to talk about. With the loss of corruption and the loss of having the ability to have 90% crit on everything, Echo of the Elements has grown in value due to the popularity of the Azerite build that we have switched back to. So Echo, for me, is going to be your de facto choice in pretty much all kinds of content. Mythic Plus, raiding, honestly, probably even PvP, I'm not too sure, but this talent overall is just going to give you more bang for your buck. 2 charges of Lava Burst is really nice, especially when you want to cast them, maybe spread out. It's really good to have this talent. We have a new talent here on the 15 row called Static Discharge. Now, this works in conjunction with your Lightning Shield. Anytime you have your Lightning Shield active, you can press this ability, and it'll send out some lightning bolts out of your shield, does a little bit of damage, and it prefers targets that are afflicted by your Flame Shock. Currently, it's just a little bit undertuned. It's a cool talent. It looks alright, I guess, but it's just not going to be better than Echo. So, cool flavor spell. Maybe they'll do some changes, and this will be a cool talent in the future. But as of right now, it's pretty safe to say that Echo is going to be your choice pretty much all the time. On the 25 row, Aftershock is still here. Nothing changed. Earthshock and Earthquake both have a 25% chance to refund all Maelstrom. It's nice in Mythic Plus. You could use it in some single target implications, I guess, if you want to go for kind of an RNG heavy build. But nothing really changed here. We have a new talent added on the level 25 row in place of Totem Mastery, called Echoing Shock. Now, Echoing Shock has a 30-second cooldown. It hits the target for some melee damage, and it creates an Ancestral Echo, causing your next damage or healing spell to be cast a second time 1 second later for free. This talent's really cool. It's got a lot of versatility. Obviously, it can replicate any spell that you use, and I do mean anything. I've tested it on pretty much any damage or healing spell. It'll replicate Flame Shock. It'll replicate Frost Shock, Lightning Bolt, Chain Lightning, Earth Shock, Earthquake, Lava Burst, like anything. It's really cool, and it's also very strong. So as of right now, I think that this is going to be your go-to talent in both Mythic Plus and raiding. I could be wrong, maybe. Elemental Blast is also moved from the 15 tier down to the 25 tier. And there's a couple changes to LA Blast to make it a little bit more desirable, I should say. So it still does LA damage, so you'll get, fire, nature, and frost damage out of it. Does a little bit of damage, and it increases your critical strike or haste by 3% now, as opposed to a flat number or whatever it was before, or your mastery by 6% for 10 seconds. It has a 12-second cooldown, so if you do take this talent, I would recommend keeping it pretty much on cooldown if you can. You'll lose a little bit of value if you don't, but overall, I think it can be good. The biggest change to Elemental Blast, however, it is now a Maelstrom generator. So this is really nice and definitely a good change to Elemental Blast. Before on the beta, they had it consuming Maelstrom after they had moved away from the fulmination idea, and it just felt awkward to kind of press this as opposed to like an Earthshock or something. It was really odd. But now it generates Maelstrom, so that's a good change, and I think that Elemental Blast might have some play depending on how the tuning of everything goes. As of right now, I think Echoing Shock is going to be your go-to. Moving on to the 30 tier here. This is all utility. Nothing here is going to increase your throughput. So we have Spirit Wolf, Earth Shield, and Static Charge. Spirit Wolf is my preferred talent. I feel like the increased movement speed you gain and the damage reduction is very strong. And it's passive. You don't have to worry about it. Just gives you a little bit extra mobility and damage reduction while you're doing it. It's nice. Earth Shield is pretty cool. You put it on either any target you want, yourself or a tank or another member of your party, and they take increased healing. They do, you can only have one of your elemental shields active at a time. So you have Earth Shield, but we also have access to Lightning Shield, which most of the time you're going to have Lightning Shield applied on yourself in case, a melee, especially in PvP. If a melee attack hits you, you get free Maelstrom, Maybe it won't have too much usage in like PvE content, because if you're getting meleeed, obviously you might die or whatever the case. Maybe you don't want to be getting meleeed. So Earth Shield is cool, and then Static Charge you can use in like 5-man dungeons. It's nice to give you a little bit of extra cast of Capacitor Totem throughout a key. I don't really think it's super necessary. But if your flavor's AoE stuns, go for it. You're not going to lose any damage out of doing so. So, moving on to the 35 tier, we have Master of the Elements, Storm Elemental, and Liquid Magma Totem. Liquid Magma Totem's a cool talent. Looks really awesome. It's just, as of right now, it's not really that good. So, Storm Elemental, however, did receive a few changes. It's the Eye of the Storm ability that you gain from taking Primal Elementalist in combination with this talent was target capped. Earthquake has no target cap. Chain Lightning has always had a target cap of 5 anyway, so that's nothing new. But the actual ability from the Storm Elemental has a target cap of 6 now. Now, this talent is still very strong, and it is still very good in Mythic Plus dungeons. My only disclaimer here is I wouldn't play this talent if you aren't confident with the pulls happening in the key you're about to run. Reason being is it's a 2.5 minute cooldown outside of Vision. Obviously, if you take Vision, which I would recommend, especially in Mythic Plus, it's 2 minutes, right? If you're not going to know the pulls, there will be a lot of times where you don't have Storm Elemental available for something where you might need it, and you'll lose overall damage in that sense. And I just think that this talent is much stronger in conjunction with the Blood of the Enemy Azerite essence, in conjunction with having a organized group or a tank that has set out kind of what he's doing in advance. So play it if you want to. It's very strong. Use it to your own discretion. I'll leave it at that. The 35 Master of the Elements, though, is very good in single target, especially with the changes to Corruption and, kind of going back to that whole Lava Burst playstyle. This talent's very, very strong in single target, and even in Mythic Plus, if you're not confident, I've played this talent in, some 21s, 20s. It's a really solid talent. There's nothing wrong with it, and if you're not sure of kind of the pull patterns, don't be afraid to take it. It's really good. Moving on to the 40 tier here. This is also a situational row. Nothing here is going to increase your throughput. So we have Nature's Guardian, Ancestral Guidance, and Windrush Totem. Windrush Totem is very, very strong. it is usually a must-have, at least one of in your raid group. So if your raid leader asks you to take this talent, it's probably because he or she knows that there's going to be a good usage for it. So it's very strong. Anytime you drop it, it's going to give all of the allies that pass through it 60% movement speed. And it's just good for, mass raid movement. If you need to drop something to get the whole raid moved, it's really solid. Even in Mythic Plus, just having a little bit of extra mobility for your group, it's a good choice. Ancestral Guidance did receive a change. It is no longer on the global cooldown, which is nice. You don't have to worry about waiting for a GCD to finish before you can start helping. It functions pretty much the same otherwise. It just does some extra healing to your injured party members anytime you deal damage or heal them. And so it's nice if you want to help provide some off healing, especially if you know that the fight is going to have some very specific damage moments where you can capitalize on using this talent to help your healers. It's solid. Nature's Guardian is also not a bad choice. This is a very good survival personal ability. If you're just kind of want to have something passive that will help you out, Nature's Guardian is going to be very solid. This gives you that little cushion anytime you get hit really hard. Maybe you can help your healer. Maybe it'll save your life if a healer's trying to cast a heal on you. So it's really solid, and there's totally nothing wrong with playing Nature's Guardian either. Excuse me. Okay, on the 45 tier, we have Surge of Power, Primal Elementalist, and Ice Fury. Now, Ice Fury has gained a lot of value due to the changes. Now, when you cast it, the Frost Shocks not only deal increased damage, but they also generate Maelstrom now. So each Frost Shock after casting Ice Fury will net you 8 Maelstrom per. So not only do you get the 25 Maelstrom, but you also get the additional 8 Maelstrom per Frost Shock that you use when you use this talent. So super solid, great change, great for mobility, and it has 30-second cooldown, so you get some extra damage. Overall, great, solid choice. Primal Elementalist is also not a terrible option. It won't net you as much raw throughput as Ice Fury will, but you're not going to be punished too severely. And also, if you ever choose to play Storm Elemental, make sure you play Primal Elementalist. Primal Elementalist isn't that bad in dungeons either, especially if you know that you're not going to be able to use Ice Fury a bunch. A lot of times in dungeons you're just casting Chain Lightnings and Earthquakes. You're not going to want to take a talent that's not going to net you anything. I would still say that even on high tyrannical keys, Ice Fury is not going to be a bad option though. Giving you that extra mobility and extra single target damage is really solid. But Primal Elementalist is nice, especially if you want the other utility benefits of it, like having the damage reduction from Earth Elemental is really cool. So nothing more really about that. And then Surge of Power functions pretty much the same way it does. Anytime you cast Earth Shock, it'll augment your next spell. This could have some cool synergy with higher flame elements or fire elemental uptime in Shadowlands, but as of right now, without the Fire LE level 2 and none of the Covenants or Legendaries or anything like that active, I wouldn't recommend playing Surge of Power at this point. You're just not going to get as much benefit as you would from the other two choices on this tier. Surge's niche has always kind of been helping you increase your single target funnel. If there's a bunch of ads around your main target, you could spread Flame Shock easier, but it's just there's not really any encounters in Nyalotha that are going to help you with using Surge of Power. So on the level 50 row, we have Unlimited Power, Stormkeeper, and Ascendants. Now, Ascendants did receive a change. Obviously, it'll still make your Lava Burst, have no cooldown, whatever. It does increase damage based on your crit chance. But now, when you activate Ascendants, it will send a Lava Burst at all enemies afflicted by your Flame Shock, and it also refreshes them to 18 seconds. So, good change. I think it's nice. I still wish that this talent would just either moved tiers or made baseline, because as it stands right now, it's just, unless your fight is going to be 40 seconds long, you're going to get more benefit out of Stormkeeper, even in single target. Obviously, in Mythic Plus, Stormkeeper is pretty much a solid choice no matter what. I don't think I've ran a key without Stormkeeper. It's very strong for AoE. It's also really good in single target. Every 3 Stormkeepers, you would get 1 Ascendance, is basically how I look at it. So if your fight length is super short, like 40 seconds, and you're just parsing and trying to kill something, hey, try Ascendance out. It might be good. Just kind of depends on how your character sims, but for me, Stormkeeper is usually just a better option. So, and then Unlimited Power, I was playing a little bit last year in conjunction with the Corruption and the Lava Bolt build, or the Lightning Bolt build, where you didn't count Lava Burst at all. Tons of fun. But it has lost a little bit of value, obviously, because we're not relying on all that extra haste that we need to just increase, our Lightning Bolt damage. So that's kind of how that goes. Moving on to our Azerite traits. Now, Azerite traits have changed from the last time I did a video. I did talk a little bit about this build specifically in that video, but at the time, just due to corruption and scaling and all that stuff, it just wasn't really worth it to include it in that part. So anyway, we have gone back, and now our Azerite traits are pretty much going to be almost all the time Igneous Potential and Natural Harmony on every slot you have. There's some cases to be made for Tectonic Thunder. Heart of Darkness is still active. You can still use it. It doesn't require a corruption effect, but most of the time it's kind of just like a worse version of Natural Harmony. So take it how you will. If you have a Heart of Darkness on your gear and you're just looking to fill out your last trait or whatever, it's not going to be a bad option. But Igneous Potential for sure, I would recommend always playing 3 of, and Natural Harmony is really solid too. If you can ideally get 3 of these, it's going to be super nice. Another notable option here is Ancestral Resonance. I do have one of these on my gear. It just increases your mastery occasionally and more often when you're in Bloodlust. It's solid. It's not going to be that big of a DPS difference between this and another natural, but take with it what you will. So that's basically how it's going to go. Obviously, in our inner tier, Overwhelming Power is going to be the best choice most of the time. And then for the inner tier, you want to either get Impassive Visage or Resounding Protection. Impassive scales with versatility, especially because of Elemental, having access to some versatility. It's a good choice, but overall, obviously, this doesn't increase your throughput, right? So if you just want a little bit of extra healing, neither one of them is going to really be a bad decision. Moving on to gearing and stat weights. So our stat weight hasn't really shifted as much. It's definitely closer now. The reason I say that is because Blizzard did implement a sort of DR on stats, so you can't just infinitely stack one stat forever and have it increase in value all the time. Your stats are much more level now with each other, with the exception being Mastery. So obviously, most of the time you're going to want crit on anything. Haste is going to be just fine. Versatility isn't going to be bad either. Mastery is honestly still just okay. So most of the time you're just kind of looking to see if the piece has crit on it, it's good. If it doesn't have crit, and maybe kind of make that decision for yourself. And I would always recommend simming your own character, as your stat priority may differ from mine a little bit, and I would just go about it that way. So for stats, crit's good, haste is good, mastery is and verse is good. So pretty balanced in that sense. Moving on to essences. Essences did change a little bit. Not really like the functionality wise, but just because of tuning, obviously they're a little different now. So some of them are kind of wonky. As for the major for rating, I would always recommend Condensed Life Force as a major. This is just going to give you some extra haste on your opener. It's really nice. Gets you some extra damage into your target. Solid cooldown. You could try using World Vein if you have a bunch of allies using it. I wouldn't personally recommend it, but do with it what you will. And for miners, now, for some reason, Crucible of Flame is extremely strong. I'm not sure if it's just because of the tuning or because of the less importance of secondary stats now that this is taken over, but it's very strong. I've seen some fights where it's like 10% of someone's overall damage. It's extremely good. So if you have access to Crucible of Flame rank 3, which I'm assuming most people at this point do, it's a great option. For the other two, I think Conflict and Strife is really solid pretty much all the time. Extra access to versatility is more damage reduction. It's just solid all around. I would use this pretty much all the time. And then I guess for your third miner, it can be a little bit interchangeable. Breath of the Dying is pretty good here, especially for the execute mechanic that it still maintains. And like I said, your value from secondary stats isn't as high, so taking something like Blood of the Enemy or Essence isn't going to give you as much value anymore, but do with it what you will. For Mythic Plus, I would say that Blood of the Enemy is still probably going to be your best major, even with running Master of the Elements and not playing Storm Elemental. I still think that Blood will be your primary major in Mythic Plus situations. The reason being is because of the combination of Echo Shock, Stormkeeper, Earthquake having no target cap. I think this will overall net you more damage, and it also does not have a drawback in single target like Azerite Beam does. With the scaling down on this thing, I mean 6650, it does a lot in AoE, and I mean you want to cast it in single target, but you're not going to get as much benefit on a boss fight as you would with Blood of the Enemy. It's also on a same cooldown, so if you don't have access to Blood, go ahead and play Iris. It's not like it's going to be the end of the world, but if you have access to Blood of the Enemy, I would definitely recommend it here. As for miners, I think Crucible is still solid. Honestly, just the damage this thing does is really ridiculous right now. Conflict, I would play most of the time as well. Just having that extra damage, extra survivability is nice. And then the last spot can be a little bit interchangeable depending on how you want to play. So if you're playing Storm Elemental in conjunction with Primal Elementalist, I would say that you should almost always play Vision or Perfection Miner. Just having the little bit of extra cooldown reduction. Instead of having a minute between your Blood of the Enemy and your Storm Melee timer, now it's only like 40 seconds or something like that, which obviously still isn't perfect, but it's much better than what you would have if you weren't playing Vision Miner. You can also go with the Formless Void Miner. Gives you a little bit of extra haste. Memory of Lucid Dreams. You could maybe play kind of a gambling build with Aftershock and Memory or something like that. I haven't tried it too much myself, but it is an option if you're interested, and yeah, that's pretty much going to be everything about essences, so let's move on. For trinkets, there are a couple different options that I think are really solid. I think the Psyche Shredder in single target is still going to be one of your best options. It does a decent amount of damage initially, but just the extra damage that you deal per strike while this is active is very good. It has a pretty decent uptime, so even in like Mythic Plus, I wouldn't think that this is the worst choice you can make. So if you have a Psyche Shredder and you just want to use it, it's a good option. The other option here that I have for single target anyway is going to be the Forbidden Obsidian Claw. This trinket is very, very good, and it does a lot of damage when you put it on your target. Gives you a little bit of mana, which doesn't really matter as a DPS. And also, another change here, and I know I'm going to get some backlash for this, but I do think the Manifesto has overtaken Psyche Shredder in Mythic Plus scenarios, definitely. And honestly, even in some single target fights, I've been playing this trinket. Now, I know that not everyone loves the effect of it and standing, close and far away from allies, and I understand how frustrating it can be, but this trinket is very strong. It synergizes pretty darn well with your cooldowns. It's up pretty much every time you have Blood of the Enemy. And it's very good. So if you have access to the Manifesto, give it a shot. I think it's really good. Synergize it with your cooldowns. Give it a shot. I think it's good. So with that, we're going to move on to the rotation section of the guide. I'm first going to kind of talk about a single target rotation, and then we'll kind of go over a little bit of AoE implications as well. So let's go ahead and switch to our default talent build. This is what I will be running on most encounters as of the pre-patch. I have a little window down here. If you can see where my cursor is, this is going to track my spells in the order that I'm casting them in. So I'll be explaining as I'm doing the sequence, but this will also give you a window of reference if you're trying to, watch along. So a few seconds before the pull, if it's single target, we're going to want to pre-cast our Stormkeeper. Probably about 4 seconds before the pull. It's just, you don't want to have to cast this as soon as you start the fight. It's better to just have these available. And then we're going to start with a precast lava burst, and as our lava burst is traveling to our target, then we apply Flame Shock. The reason being is because this will give you a chance to get a spell going before combat. It will net you a little bit of extra damage, and Flame Shock also does not have the global cooldown restriction as well, so you can follow, you can follow Lava Burst with a Flame Shock, and as it's traveling to your target, Flame Shock will hit, and your Lava Burst will automatically strike. So, in addition to that, we also have to worry about Echoing Shock now. Now, here's what I will say for Echoing Shock. Echoing Shock is really strong on a lot of spells you can replicate. As of right now, in single target, I think the most important thing to use it on is either A, a Stormkeeper empowered, Master of the Elements empowered Lightning Bolt, or B, just a straight up Lava Burst. So if you have Stormkeeper active and you've already casted a Lava Burst, you can follow with an Echoing Shock into a Lightning Bolt, and it will give you a big increase on that damage. If you don't have access to Stormkeeper, which you won't because Echoing Shock has a 30-second cooldown while Stormkeeper has a 1 minute. So every 2 Echoing Shocks, you'll get a Stormkeeper, basically. So when you don't have access to that, in single target, the most important ability that you can replicate as of right now is going to be Lava Burst. So, going back to the start, we're going to precast Storm Elemental. We're going to start with a precast Lava Burst into Flame Shock. We're going to Echoing Shock into our first Lightning Bolt Stormkeeper charge. From there, we're going to Ice Fury, and we should have close to enough Maelstrom to Earth Shock, I would think. So we will follow with Earth Shock, our second Lava Burst, and our second Stormkeeper charge, and then we continue with our normal rotation. Also, before you cast your Echoing Shock Lightning Bolt and stuff like that, I would recommend getting your cooldowns running, so activating your Fire Elemental, your Guardian of Azeroth, and I would use your Manifesto at first, especially if you're lusting. This is going to give you a lot of value. So I'm just going to do a pull timer. I'm going to talk a little bit about it as I'm doing it, but I also, like I said, have this window here. So let's go ahead and start a pull timer here. Getting ready, we're getting set up. Also, with the changes to the potions, you no longer have to worry about pre-potting. Use it whenever you feel like. It's 5-minute cooldown. So about here, we're going to Stormkeeper, and then we're going to precast a Lava Burst into our Lust activator cooldowns here. And then we're going to activate our Trinket, Echoing Shock, Lightning Bolt, Lava Burst, Lightning Bolt, and then we just continue with our rotation from here. Making sure we maintain Flame Shock, casting Lava Burst in between each of our spells to get the maximum benefit out of Master of the Elements and not overcapping on Maelstrom. This is going to be pretty much the rotation that you follow. We'll activate our second Trinket here, and you're just going to keep going this and keep hitting the boss, maintaining your Flame Shock, rotating your spells. Now we're about to get Echoing Shock off the cooldown again, so we're going to cast that and use it on a Lava Burst, and then we can Earth Shock. So in that opener, I did about 5.2k DPS. It's not like incredibly high. I've seen some Shamans do a little bit more burst damage. Kind of depends on your rolls, I guess, but that's going to be like the basic opening rotation. And then after that, your normal spell priority is going to be Lava Burst if you have a charge available and Master of the Elements is not present, followed by Earth Shock, your Stormkeeper, rolling that, your Ice Fury charges, and then at the dead bottom, if you have nothing else to cast Lightning Bolt. Moving on to AoE, the only real difference here is instead of casting Lightning Bolt as a builder, we're going to cast Chain Lightning. This obviously has a target cap of 5 targets, and I guess I should have chosen a better spot with some more stacked AoE dummies to kind of show you how it works. But Chain Lightning gains increased Maelstrom based on the amount of targets it hits. And the only real difference in AoE outside of Lightning Bolt is instead you'll use Chain Lightning. You're going to use your Stormkeepers on Chain Lightning cast, and instead of using Earth Shock, you're also going to use Earthquake instead. The biggest thing that I would say, especially for Echoing Shock, however, is when you use Echoing Shock in combination with a Stormkeeper Chain Lightning, it has a chance to it overloads to everything and overloads to everything again. So, one thing to note about when you're using Echoing Shock in this way is make sure you echoing use your Stormkeeper, and immediately after you cast your Stormkeep or your Chain Lightning, drop an Earthquake, because you're gonna get so much Maelstrom that you're gonna get enough Maelstrom a second later to cast the second Earthquake instantly. It basically puts you at 100 and then 100. Like, it's a lot of Maelstrom. So in AoE, make sure that you're doing that, and make sure to use your cooldowns often. Another thing that like I would recommend for everyone trying to improve their overall damage or whatever the case may be is using your cooldowns. There's a lot of times where inside of a dungeon, maybe you're holding your cooldowns for the boss coming up, or you don't know exactly when to use them. If you're new to it, I would recommend just pressing them as often as you can. And if in hindsight you get to a point where you're like, oh man, I really wish I had cooldowns for that specific moment, now you know for future times when you go into that dungeon that, you know, when you're approaching this pack, you're like, oh well, I know I can use this cooldown because it's short enough, but I'd like to save this and this for here. And that's going to net you more overall damage and just, you know, give you more efficiency as a player. So that's kind of it about Ellie for the pre-patch. A couple other things, I guess. I would make sure to either use Torrent of Elements or Machinist Brilliance. Kind of depends. As of my character, Sim's a little bit higher with Machinist Brilliance, but Torrent of Elements is extremely strong if you have access to it. So, yeah, that's about it. And until next time, my dudes, thanks guys for watching, and we're going to move on to a couple of other specs next, and that's about it. So, peace.